Aleph. We're Masechta Sukkah, Gimel Lamed Aleph. Elamad Rav Sukkah Ketana Machlokas. We're dealing with a machlokas regarding whether or not a sukkah that is 20 amas high or not is possible or not. And we were saying that maybe the machlokas is only regarding a small sukkah, either less than 4 by 4 amas or Rosh Verubo. And they brought a raya from Hileni Amalka that that Hileni Amalka was sitting in a sukkah and the Chacham didn't say anything. But it can't be a case of the Gemara says of a sukkah ketana, v'chidaka shel malka leisha v'sukkah ketana. A queen doesn't sit in a sukkah less than 4 by 4. So it can't be the explanation of that Hileni Amalka's problem was that she was sitting in such a small sukkah. Amar Ravada, lo nitzach al sukkah asuya kitonios kitonios. So this is a sukkah that is sort of divided into small little compartments. It's the same thing. A queen is going to sit in a sukkah that has a big reception area. It's not going to be in this little subdivided sukkah. We're talking about Hileni Amalka for tznius reasons. She sat in one of these walled off small little areas. And the machlokas is like this. Her sons, who we had determined were of the age of chinuch, had to sit in a kosher sukkah, but she sat in the smaller area. That's why, because a woman is patur sukkah, so there was no problem. That's why the Chacham didn't say anything to her, Hileni Amalka. Rabbi Yehuda held that the sons were with her. Even so, they didn't say anything to her. Because they held that could be that the sukkah that is even higher than Esri Mama were kosher. So you can't learn from this to Sefta one way or the other regarding that issue. The halacha is that a minimum size sukkah has to be where the person can sit his head, the majority of his body, and his table. So what? We know that is the sheet of Beis Shammai. We're passing like Beis Shammai. That's unusual. Well, what? Yeah, we pass like Beis Shammai. Ikid Yami say Amar Avaba. The Amar Lachmani. Who told you this? Amar Le Beis Shammai. V'lo tozus we know. Even though it's Beis Shammai, we don't move from there. That's the halach. The halach in the Shulchan Aruch is it's a sukkah tzricha shetei machzekes rosh v'ruba v'shulchano, which is 7 by 7 tvachim. The halacha here is like Beis Shammai. It's got to be 7 by 7 square. Minimum. Maski Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak b'may de Beis Shammai Beis Hillel pligi. Are you telling me that Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel argue regarding the minimum share of a sukkah? Dilma v'sukkah gedola pligi. Maybe they're not talking about a small sukkah. They're talking about a sukkah that's more than 4 by 4 amas. However, kigon de Yosef apuma de metulta. The person is sitting sort of at the doorway of the sukkah. V'shulchanu b'sukkah bayis. So he's sitting in the sukkah. Part of the table is in the sukkah. The rest of the table is drawn into the house. And what's the din? The Beis Shammai Sari Gazrin and Shammai Moshe Chacha Shulchano. Beis Shammai will say such an arrangement will be possible because we're concerned that the person will follow where the table is going, which is in the house. He won't eat in the sukkah. Beis Hillel Safri Loi Gazrina. And Beis Hillel says, no, it's permitted. V'dekanami. I'll show you from the language itself of the Mishnah that it's correct. Diktani. Mishani Rosh of Ruba Sukkah, somebody whose head and majority of his body was in the sukkah. Vishulchan of Sachabayis. The table, though, is in the house. Beishamai Poisli, Ubeisel Machshirin. And V'im Isa, if they're arguing in the shear, they would say Machzekes, very Machzekes Meboile. It would say, can the sukkah hold that or not? It doesn't say hold. It has to do with whether they're moishech after the table that's going into the house. So it seems like the Gemara rejected the notion that Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel were arguing about a sukkah ketana. What do you mean? I'll show you that they do argue about a sukkah ketana. Vatanya. Machzekas Rosh of Aruba v'Shulchana, which is a small, only 7 by 7 tvachim, ksheira. Rebbe Oimer ad sheyeh bo arba amos al arba amos. It's got to be 4 by 4 amos. Vatanya idich. Another bride says, Rebbe Oimer, kol sukkah shein bo arba amos al arba amos psula. The Chachamim Oimer afilu eina machzekas al Rosh of Aruba ksheira. Yet v'ilu Shulchana lo ktani. So kashin adadi. So the brises are a steer to each other. Ela lav shmamina, must be one brisa is Beis Shammai, which is the one that includes Shulchano, and the other one is Beis Hillel. Amar Marzutra Masnisa Nami Deka. I'll prove to you that the Mishnah is like what we just said. Miditoni Beis Shammai Poislin. They use the language of posel and kosher. Right? Beis Shammai Poislin, Beis Hillel Machshir. V'misa, if they're arguing. In a Beis Shammai Amrim lo yotzo, Beis Hillel yotzo boile. It should say, is this person yotze or not yotze when he sits there? Elakasha misha. What about the Bryce that says misha haya? So the Gemara says lo elam betarti pligi. Turns out that Beis Shammai are arguing both issues. Pliga b'sukkah ketano, pliga b'sukkah ketano. They argue in the minimum dimensions of a sukkah. They argue regarding this issue that if a person's sitting in a regular sized sukkah, but his table is drawn into the house, what the din would be. And there were words missing that confused us. This is how you have to understand it. Person's head and majority of his body is in the sukkah. But his table is drawn into the house. Because he's goizer that you're going to be drawn into the house. And if it's not, if the shear is 7 by 7 fachim, Beis Shammai say it's not good. Beis Hillel is machshir, which is the way the chol hashitas, and that's why I end up paskening. It turns out to be the shita Beis Hillel. Now the Gemara wants to know, since we have this machlokas, Rebbe said that a sukkah has to be arba by arba, and the Chachamim said no, it could be even smaller. So the Gemara wants to know now, man tana laha de tana rabbanon. Who then is the author of the following baraisa? Bayis shein bo arba ames al arba ames. A house that does not have 4 by 4 ames. So number one, potter min mezuzah. Normally we have to put a mezuzah on a house, but if the house is smaller than daled by daled ames, it's not considered a house. Number two, min amakeh. A makeh is a retaining fence on the roof of your house. That a house that's less than daled by daled has no din makeh. 3, einam atama bin negoim. We know there's a concept of tumas negoim, that a house can be afflicted with a nega. A house less than 4 by 4 ames has no din tuma. There's no nega by, so it's not considered a house. Somebody sells a house in a walled city and it was not redeemed. The seller didn't redeem it within a year. So the bias becomes a kinyan gomor to the person who bought it. But that's only if the house is considered a house. It's got to be at least daled by daled. If he sold an item that was less than daled by daled, it's not a house, doesn't fall under the din of nechlat bebate arechoma. Next halacha in Choshen Alav Marcha Melchama. The pasuk said, "Mi Aish Asher Bona Bayis Chadash." Who is the man who built a new house and didn't dedicate it yet? Such a person can go back from the war, right? If he's drafted in the army, it's a deferment. Like somebody who's just got married the first year can go back home. Somebody who planted a vineyard can go back home. Somebody who built a new house. Now, if the house is less than dalad al dalad, he doesn't get the deferment. Vein marvin bo, vein mishtatfin bo. If you have multiple homes that open up into a chutzner, so we've learned that even though both are Reshus HaYachid, you cannot carry from a house into the chutzner unless they make an eruv, right? The three people who live in houses opening up into that chutzner have to give money. They buy a loaf of bread and they put it in one of the houses. It's become like one Reshus. However, if the house is not dalad al dalid, they don't have to give money to the pas. It's not considered a house. It will not ruin the eruv if it doesn't participate. That's the din of eruv. It also, there's no din of shituf. If you have multiple chatzeros opening up into a mavu, it's the same din. And if it's a bias that's opening up into a chotzer, then it's not part of the shituf, and he doesn't have to participate in it. If you have multiple houses opening up into the chutzner, and you're deciding which house to put the bread in, you don't put it in the house. It's less than dalad al dalad. It's not considered a bias. That we learned in Masechta Eruvin, that if you have two cities adjoining, depending on if there's 70 amas in front of each city, so how do you determine differential between cities? You could have, if you have a house within 140 amas, so then that determines the sort of the city limits. That house between two cities has to be at least dalad by dalad. Otherwise, it's not considered a house. If you have partners or brothers that inherited an estate, so it's not considered a house to divide unless it's dalad al dalad. This brisa that said that a house less than dalad by dalad is not considered a house. Lema Rebbe, v'lo Rabbanan. We had a machlokas earlier tonight regarding the size of a sukkah. Rebbe said a sukkah has to be dalad al dalad. If it's less than dalad, that's not a good sukkah. So maybe the author of this Mishnah that said that a bias has to be dalad al dalad is Rebbe. So where's afilu temer Rabbanan? You're not forced to say that. We could say even the Chachamim who say that a sukkah less than dalad al dalad is kosher, they might agree that a house less than dalad al dalad is not kosher. Ad kan lakami Rabbanan also in sukkah. The Rabbanans were makel and said a small 7x7 tfachim sukkah is kosher because the diras aroihi. What is a sukkah? It's a temporary dwelling, and therefore a temporary dwelling could be even such a small place. Aval gabi bias. The definition of a bias is a diras kvahu. That's a permanent dwelling place. I feel Rabbanan moide that even the Chacham will agree the ESP arba ames al arba ames dari beinshi. Person will dwell permanently in such a structure. The ilo lo dari beinshi. If the house is less than dalad al dalad, the person won't live there. Okay, so the Gemara is going to dissect the Baraisa a little more carefully. Amar Mar. We said a house that's less than dalad al dalad, poter minam nezuzah, umina makeh, ve'emetame bin negoyim, ve'eno nochlat b'batei arechoma. It's poter from the zuzah, from the retaining gate. There's no tumas nega. It doesn't have a din of batei arechoma. Ve'en chosher lav marcha melchama. You cannot use it as a deferment to go back from the war. My time. And the bias ksiv bubakulu. On all those places, it says bias. It says amazuzos beisecha. It says kisivne bias chadash. Uva asher lo abayis. L'chiyim chokor beis moshav. Asher bias chadash. In each place it says bias. V'ein ma'arvin bo v'mishtatfin bo. Now, these things are rabbinic structures. Eruv chatzeros, shituf mavuos. Those are not written in the Torah. Those are rabbinic structures. V'ein manichin bo eruv. And the din of eruv is rabbinic. So, my taima, where did the Chachamim get that if it's not dalad al dalad, it wouldn't suffice? So, the Gemara answers the lo chazi l'dira. You have these things. The reason why eruv works is because it's a dira. It's a place that if you put a bread there, it'll be watched as if somebody's living there. But if it's less than dalad al dalad, it's not chazi l'dira. Then we said eruv chatzer semanichim bo. When you make an eruv between multiple batim opening up into one chotzer, we said in that case, you don't put the loaf of bread in the bias that was less than dalad al dalad. Aval shituv manichin bo. We said that if you have a bias, a small bias, by shituv mavus, you could put the bread there. My timer. The loy garme chotzer shabamavu. Well, you could put the bread in a courtyard in a mavu. So it's certainly not worse than a courtyard. Where do you see that you can do that? It's not. Eruv chatzeros b'chotzer, shitufim mavui b'mavui, and vavinam ba. What does that mean? Eruv chatzeros b'chotzer. You put the bread in the chotzer. Vatnan hanoisen eruvo b'beis shar avsadru mirpeses. If you put the loaf of bread for the eruv in like a guardhouse or a patio or balcony, eino eruv. The hadar sham eino oiser. So if you can't put it in those things, you certainly can't put it in the chotzer. When you're making an eruv chatzeros, you must put the loaf of bread in a house that opens up in the chotzer. And v'shitufa mevuas b'chotzer shemamavui. The loaf of bread, when you're connecting different chatzeros that open up in a mavui, you may place the bread in the mavui in the chotzer itself. And therefore, if you can place the bread in an open courtyard and it's okay, a house less than dalad al dalad ames is not going to be worse than a chotzer. Then we said, that when you're doing this calculation between two cities, a house less than dalad al dalad, it won't work. However, in the sugya over there, we learned burgnin are like little huts that would be out in the field that they would hire guardsmen to watch over the field. And that would work to join two cities. But a bias less than dalad al dalad is not even like a burgnin. My time, a burgnin chazal milsayu. These huts could be used as a watchman's place. But v'haylo chazil milsei. But a bias that's less than dalad al dalad can't be used for anything. And the Mishnah said, "Eina achin ashutafim cholkin bo," that brothers that are dividing an estate or partners that are dividing something, they don't divide. This is not considered part of the estate because a bias less than dalad al dalad, it's not a bias. Time at less be'arba amis. Ayis be'arba amis cholkin. So what do you tell me? If it's arba amis, they do divide vatnan. Ein cholkin es a chotzer. So let's say they're dividing a courtyard. If the courtyard total was only 7 amas, and each partner couldn't get at least arba amas for themselves, it's not part of the division. So, and the Gemara understands that to mean it would be the same as a house. It's not enough dalad al dal. You need at least like dalad al shmona. Elaema ein bo din chaluka kachotzer. In a chanami, it doesn't have the din of being able to divide up like a chotzer. Dam Ravuna chotzer lefi psachem is chalekas. Chotzer, you have to calculate how many openings in the chotzer. Each, in front of each opening of a chotzer, you've got to give at least arba amas. And each person gets one of those if you're dividing it. The rest is divided equally. The hanimili bayis still have a koi. When do we say all of this? For a bias that it's appropriate to give it a chotzer. Most batim have a chotzer. High, the limits are koi, but a house less than dalad al dalad lo yavin like chotzer wouldn't be given a chotzer, so therefore would not be considered part of the division. So then the Mishnah said, "Hai segvoy mesri mama." The Mishnah mentioned that if a sukkah the schach was higher than 20 ames, you need to lower it. Well, there's another alternative. You could build up the floor of the sukkah, so the space between the floor and the schach is less than 20 ames. However, if you did it, if you put pillows and sheets on the floor to lessen the space, the airspace between the floor and the schach, then it would be considered not an appropriate. Even though he was mavatal those things, because we shouldn't have batal kolona, but most people are not mavatal pillows and things like that. And it's not a normal usage of pillows and things. So we follow normal usage. Since normal usage, people wouldn't do that, they're not going to do that here either. Okay. So tomorrow we will learn